Archdeacon's visitations are back. I know you've missed them for about 5 years. Those of you who've been churchwardens long enough to remember 5 years ago. To make them sound a little bit more friendly, we've decided to call them Archdeacon's visits. I know these things really matter to you, but we didn't want you to feel that Alex and I were going to come and breathe down your neck. For those of you who are not familiar with two different things that come at you from our office. There are articles of inquiry, a one-page sheet that you filled in hopefully around the time that you were admitted as churchwardens a few months ago, and Archdeacon's visits, which are a 6-page document that you've had warning we are starting next year. So in, I think, February of this year, we sent out a letter to you and to incumbents to say Archdeacon's visits are returning in a year's time. You've got time to get yourself ready for them. They are quite different documents in some ways, although some of the areas are duplicated. Articles of inquiry is really lots of tick boxes about checking we're all covering the bases on kind of legal minimum requirements. It shouldn't take you very long to do. Most of it you should be able to do from your working knowledge. Occasionally you might need to go and ask somebody else about something that's on the articles of inquiry, the one-page document. Visitations are a bit of a deeper dive into what's going on. They should be the prelude to then a face-to-face meeting, and that meeting needs to be thinking in terms of an hour or two for us. But they're really about cementing that partnership between you and us. Both of these documents are really aimed at you as churchwardens. You will need to involve others, particularly in the Archdeacon's visits, but our primary question is to you as churchwardens, because we want to get to know you better and your parish context better, because we want to support you, and because you and we and PCCs together have various legal requirements placed on us. The law says that archdeacons should carry out a visitation every year, every church in the diocese. Once upon a time, churchwardens used to do that. There are 360 churches in the diocese. If Alex and I did a visit to each one every year to do this kind of thing, we wouldn't do all the other things that Bishop's Council requires of us. So what we're proposing with this relaunch is that we try and get round every church in a 3-year cycle. Some churches we may ask our rural dean colleagues to do the face-to-face bit, so that Alex and I are spending all our time on visitations. That's not saying that there's any kind of hierarchy in that. We will pick up those ones, particularly where the rural dean themselves is the incumbent and they can't visit themselves, and anywhere else that's kind of bubbling up as being more urgent to us. Why are we doing them? So we're doing them, as I say, to strengthen our relationships with you, because we want to better understand where you're at. You can tell us what you're struggling with, and we can make available to you the diocese's resources. So as we do this collectively, we'll be feeding back to our colleagues in this building to say, there seems to be lots of churches that are struggling with this area. Can we sharpen up our resources or develop some new resources to help them? Sometimes we know things go wrong. Sometimes churches suffer fires, either small or catastrophically. Sometimes toilets end up in the wrong place. I can't remember where I took this photo, but it's not the most obvious place to put the toilet, but there it is. I'm sure it was there with permission to be there. Sometimes the church silver gets stolen. Sometimes there are safeguarding issues that arise that may be historic or may be current. Sometimes roofs leak. You've heard Jeffrey talking about that. And of course, a roof leak is not an act of God. Rain is an act of God. And that sad situation that Jeffrey spoke about, where because somebody hadn't cleared out the gullies for 15 years, in the end, the church is closing. Now, whose responsibility was that? Well, it was partly our responsibility as a diocese. We didn't engage closely enough. It was partly the Churchwarden responsibility, partly the PCC, partly the incumbents. But we want to find things before they lead to catastrophic losses insofar as we can, and we want to do that together. There's no finger pointing involved in this. If you've had a look at the document, we'll send it out again so you've had a reminder of it if you didn't see it when we sent it out earlier in the year. And you've looked at it and you thought, oh my word, there's so much on here I do not know the answer to, or even where to find the answer. Here are some places that you might go to help you. So the diocesan website is going to be your first port of call. There are links in there to all kinds of policies and practice guidance and people that you can phone up if you want to check out an area. Ecclesiastical insurance cover all kinds of areas around the building. So they're not just an insurance provider, they've got a whole set of information and resources for you. Everything from health and safety policies to how to bring down the number of slips and trips and falls in your church premises to what some of the other things they've got up there. Lone working advice, fire safety advice, and all of that. So really helpful stuff there. Parish Resources website. This is a national church website that also has some documents that might be useful to you. Or give Alex or I a ring, or your rural dean, or ask another church if you're in a benefice, a multi-parish benefice, go to another church in the benefice, ask those who were church wardens before you, etc., etc. We're all here to help you navigate your way through this. So we're getting on to the document. The document is a 6-page document, and it starts with asking about how are your clergy doing? And this is a new section there because we want to be clear that one of your responsibilities is to cooperate and support clergy if you're lucky to have them at the moment. I know some of you are in vacancy, but so a few questions. We're not asking you to pry into their private life, but we want to have a conversation with you about some of the things that you may be doing to support them. You can always pick up the phone to Alex or I and say, there is an issue. I've got some concerns about one of the clergy that's working with us for whatever. They're not taking a day off. They never seem to go on holiday. They never answer their emails, or whatever it is. Pick up the phone and talk to us about them. So there's a section here which is inquiring into that, inviting you to have a conversation, but it's really in the context of reminding you and us that we're here together. What we do affects the well-being of clergy, and what the well-being of clergy impacts on the well-being of our parishes, of our mission, and our whole communities. The second section is about congregational well-being. This is the section that's always been in there. You may say, well, a lot of this information that we're asking you, isn't it already known to the diocese? Why are you asking us for information that you already know? And of course, some of this information is held in our database. We don't need you to spend hours and hours finding it all out, but we want you to give us what you think is the true answer to this, because we end up getting information from various sources, and often it doesn't make any sense. So one year, churches tell us that their congregation is 50 people, and the next year it's 500, and then the year after that's gone down to 45. And you think, well, it doesn't make any sense to us. So it's really helpful to have a moment in time where you say, as church wardens, we think this is how our congregation looks at this time. Some of these, of course, start to become legal issues around GDPR, who holds your congregational database. So there's a mixture of data gathering in here. How are you doing? How are your officers doing? How difficult are you finding it to recruit officers? what have you started up here around fresh expressions that we might not know about from any other context, as well as some information that we could find from other submissions that you make, but we're asking you here if you can work that out from your sense, or from the service register or whatever at the time. We're not asking you to spend hours and hours researching this. Then we've got some free text area. This is really for you to tell us what's going really well or what you're really concerned about. So you may not want to write everything down here. So there may be something that you want to tell the rural dean or Alex and I in confidence when we come and see you. That might be better done out of this meeting, because I'm not sure who else you'll invite to this, but it's a reminder to you that we really do want an open communication about your successes and areas that are causing you to lose sleep at night. Again, you'd think we know this one, or we ought to know the financial thing, but it's there as a reminder. Expenses being fully reimbursed, though, is not something that we ask you elsewhere. So do you know your clergy are claiming their expenses, and your lay officers, are they claiming expenses for their work? Are you able to meet those? Are you keeping a record of that over the years? One of the other things that we're hoping to do with this information is to target it to helping parishes fundraise. We're one of the kind of Achilles heels of so many of our churches is that we're not great at maximizing our income by approaching our whole community. Communities are massively invested in their churches existing, but not always massively invested in financially supporting them. So how do we bridge that gap so that members of the community can support the church, even if they don't come Sunday by Sunday yet? So it helps us to have a sense of how you're getting on around all of that. So that's the first page. Then we get into asking you about some employment policies. You may think, well, I'd love to be able to employ people, but we don't because we can't. Do you pay an organist? Do you pay somebody to verge at a wedding or a funeral? Have you got policies that support you around those occasional people that you pay to do occasional things? So the answer may be, no, we don't need them. The answer may be, we've got an employee handbook this thick, or somewhere in between, which is probably many of our churches, somewhere in between. Do you know you've ticked the boxes that you need to? Where are the policies? When did you last have a look at them? As well as all the safer recruiting things that comes to you automatically. Insurance policies. Again, you've all got insurance. What we're finding is that churches are beginning to play around with, do we purchase 100% rebuild costs? We don't know that information. So if you know your PCC have made a decision to only insure the building for 50% of rebuild costs, which may be enough in most cases, it's helpful for us as a diocese to keep a record of that, so we kind of know where the needle's going on that. Is your church hall insured by, there's only two church insurers, Trinitas and EIG, but church halls can be insured by a multiple of different insurance companies. Are you automatically going with the same one that insures your church, or are you able to segregate out who you go to for insurance? Have you got these things, the liability certificates displayed? So a certain amount of it is about what is visible as well as what's gone on behind the scenes here. A last insurer's review, that's often triggered by your insurance company rather than you asking for it, but every so often they should come and do a look around the building and talk to you about whether they valued your building at proper levels or not. Generally, you don't want those because your premium might go up, but you probably do if you're anticipating making a claim. PCC health and safety. This is a huge area. Okay, there's a few boxes here. It's a huge area that I'm sure you all engage with at some point. Some of you may lose more sleep over this than others. There's a lot of work behind the scenes to fill these ones in. We don't want to stress you out about it, but there's some quick wins here and some other things that you may want to talk through, whoever comes to review you, whether it's us or a rural dean, about, how do I manage some of the areas that are not obvious to me. If it goes wrong, it can go terribly wrong. We're getting more and more emphasis on our safeguarding, but if this goes wrong, people can lose their lives or become permanently disabled. So we know this is an equally important area to safeguarding, and perhaps the church doesn't automatically direct our attention to it. So lots of work around there for us to look at together.
Well, we've already had a session on safeguarding, and I think one of the things to say about this whole process is that it's partly an opportunity for Richard and for me to kind of check in and check up, but actually there's a self-audit element to this. If you're having to ask these questions from time to time at regular intervals, then you're making sure that actually you are keeping up to date with things. I imagine that safeguarding is an area where this is probably on your PCC agenda, if not every meeting, at least annually. There'll be some sort of review of, are your safeguarding arrangements in place, and so on. But this is information. It's helpful for us to check that we have got the right information centrally. For example, is the parish safeguarding officer that you actually have the same person that we think you have? We don't. The safeguarding team was saying only earlier this week at a meeting that they're not always notified when a PSO changes. And of course, if their job is to support the PSO, they don't know who the PSO is, then they can't provide that support. So it's really helpful to have these kind of update for us. And you've seen along there something like asking about children in communion. This is an area where it's really helpful for the diocese to know what the general pattern and practice is across churches. Are we seeing an increase in the number of children being admitted to communion before confirmation, which is perfectly legitimate? And therefore, do those officers and staff in the diocese who are responsible for supporting the sort of theological, spiritual, religious education of children, targeting in a way that's going to be helpful to support what you are doing at local level? Well, again, we've had your presentation on buildings issues, but these are, again, just to highlight again the point that Jeffrey made about, if you leave something for a long time, like gutters, and no one ever asks the question, you can have a kind of catastrophic failure as a result. So, again, these things really helpful, both for you to do your self-audit, making sure you're keeping on top of things, and we can know. And if we discover, for example, that lots of churches are not managing the asbestos in the buildings, then we may need as a diocese to think about, well, what resources do we need to supply to churches to make sure that kind of work is happening? There is an expectation that when faculty work is completed, that there's a notification that comes to the Archdeacon. I think most parishes are fairly reliable about that. But again, this is a good way for us just to check that the system is actually working. We have a system in place, but you have to crank the handle to make sure that it's operational. It's all part of our desire to be welcoming and accessible to the whole of our communities. We cannot afford for people to have a poor experience of the church. Sadly, there are all too many people out there who've had a poor experience of the church and are only too pleased to post about it on social media, etc. But but it's not just about our reputation. This is actually about our care for those who have particular needs. And so, asking these questions, checking that parishes are engaging with those really important issues. And these are These are issues of very significant importance across our communities. And I would say, especially among young people, if we're serious about growing younger as a church, young people are really passionate about inclusion and accessibility. And so if they see and experience that the church is passionate about those things, then that will really help to create an environment in which they feel that they belong, that they can connect with. Of course, there are significant challenges around accessibility and medieval buildings. We know that, and of course, there are legal apparatus in place to help manage the level of requirement on church buildings to be accessible. But again, if we would discover that there were a lot of churches that were struggling with a particular issue of accessibility, then as a diocese, we might be able to sort of gather some resources together in order to provide some sort of block help for a common problem. Well, this again is part of your kind of regular self-review, your self-audit. Is the church fire safe and so on? But again, we just wanting to check in. Lightning conductors and electrical safety. It is surprising how often a new churchwarden will be appointed or a new vicar be appointed, and they discover that there's like a major defect with the electrical system in a church, or they go into the vestry and see some strange bit of clearly DIY wiring that's gone on. Those things need to be remedied. So by keeping a regular check and making sure that electrical appliances have been properly tested within your churches, because your insurance may only be valid if your electrical equipment is in certified good working order and safe. Again, some questions around here that have a kind of that dual aspect of being both pretty important in terms of your church insurance. You don't want to invalidate your insurance by not doing something that you should have. But rather more importantly, it's about our gospel desire to care for the people that connect with our churches, making sure that they are safe and that our resources are being protected, so that if there is, unfortunately, a break-in or a theft or etc., that there's appropriate insurance and other measures to make sure that we're good stewards of our resources. And we have, sadly, we have a regular round of metal thefts that often hit the headlines. What we don't hear so much of is the sort of everyday thefts of precious metal from the safe and so on. And so making sure that the security of our valuables is monitored on an ongoing basis is really important. Some information for us, again, checking in about the status of your churchyards. As Jeffrey said earlier, churchyards are really becoming more and more important as people care more about the quality of the local environment, biodiversity, and so on. And we are stewards of some really remarkable and comparatively unique parcels of land. And so just highlighting this as an area where we're keen to know what's going on and whether the responsibilities of the PCC are being fulfilled for the good of the church, clearly, but also as part of our mission, in fact, to the wider community. And there are naturally health and safety issues associated with that as well. You are supposed to keep a certain number of records, occasionally I do, or Richard, I'm sure the same, will get a call from a newly elected churchwarden and said, I've opened the safe and I can't find a terrier or a logbook or a register of baptisms, etc., graveyard map and so on. And if that happens to you, you'll know that it can be a real pain trying to put together all that information if it has been lost. So keeping a check that these documents are present and that they're kept up to date and that they are stored safely and that people know where to find them is pretty important. And sometimes, we discover that someone has taken a document home that perhaps shouldn't have been taken home, and we might need to have a conversation with that person and say, look, you're really not allowed to remove the marriage registers from the church, for example. If you don't know what any of these things are, we are a community of no shame. So if you think I have absolutely no idea what a terrier is, or a logbook, or whatever, or an archdeacon, please, there's no shame in asking the question, and then of course you can go away and find it. And I mean, some of these things, of course, you're supposed to, as churchwardens, keep up to date yourselves and present at the annual meeting to demonstrate that the church property and other effects is being properly looked after and monitored. A few other bits to do with the general operation, governance of the parish, and also just, making the point that some of this information is information that should be in the public domain. It doesn't mean you have to put it on your Facebook pages, etc., but it does need to be displayed in a public place, which is a reminder that our churches are community organisations. We are not private clubs. We're community organisations, and therefore we want to have a degree of transparency in our local community so that people can see what's going on in the local church. And then just a nice picture of good church people to finish. I think that is the end of the. It's inevitable. I think that some, perhaps all of you, will view the return of the Archdeacon's visits as yet another burden. I'm sorry about that. We are legally obliged to conduct these visitations. It's important that we're not negligent in our duties. But ultimately, the purpose of these things is, over the long term, to make sure that your churches are in a good place. And in order to pick up any problems at a very early stage. Sometimes what happens is that a phone call comes into one of us that says, oh, well, we've just hit an iceberg. And we will jump in our cars, or I might get on my motorcycle, and we'll come and we'll help with the salvage operation. But if we know that there's an iceberg on the horizon, we might be able to jump in our cars or our motorcycles and come and help you steer around it. So, the point of these regular touching base is not just to put yet another burden on you, though I appreciate that it is consuming of your time and energy, but it's actually to ensure that we are being as helpful as we can be. And we have tried to manage the extent of this visitation programme to give you a little bit of light relief between our visits every 3 years. The last thing to say is that we actually really like you. And we really care about your parishes. And so we are glad to have an opportunity to come and hear from you. And particularly, as Richard's mentioned earlier, there may be some things that you'd like to talk to us about that never go on any form, but that if you have the chance to see us for a couple of hours face to face, you can tell us, these are our heart's desires, these are the things that keep us awake at night, and so on. And we will value that, and I hope that you will come to value that too. And much of the rest of it, hopefully, will be a relatively quick operation, but a way for us to get a sense of where you are, and then for us to have a conversation about your needs, the support the diocese might be able to offer, and so on.